and blessings, family. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome back to What is the Time, a podcast about celestial timing, personal sovereignty, and living where the getting is good. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sending me a tip via Venmo, Cash App, PayPal. You make this possible. I don't have a sponsorship or nothing like that. This is all just me doing the best that I can do. And also today, I am super excited to hang out here with my good friends, the Astro Mages, the Wizards, the Wise People. I got some fam on the show today. I'm very excited. In no particular order, we have today Pallas K. Augustine on the show. I'm a huge fan of Pallas's work. Pallas has been working on a book on the IC, which is getting ready to drop soon. We are all on the edge of our seats about it. I'm so excited. I also have my friend here, Cameron Allen, who just came off an American tour. He killed the game out at ESAR, I heard. I wasn't able to get out there, but I heard that he tore it up. I am super excited to have these folks on the show, and we are going to talk about the quarter ahead. We've got 3 months of wild astrology ahead, and I'm so excited to welcome these friends. Welcome, you guys.
Thanks, Zamboni. Hi, Cameron.
Hey, what's up? I'm glad to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun time. It's going to be fun. So before we for real get started, I do want to send a shout out to the elders. So without Chris Brennan, Austin Kopic, and Kelly Surtees, we would not be here. We trod in their footsteps. They blazed the trail. They made this whole thing possible. They contributed mightily to my astro education at very least, for free. For free 99, these people did that, and they made this whole thing possible. And so we are going to carry on that tradition. And so I just want to send a quick shout out. Thank you so much to Chris Brennan and the Astrology Podcast. Shout out Austin Kopic, Kelly Surtees. Shout out to the fam.
Kelly. Miss Kelly.
I sure do miss Kelly on that podcast. Miss her so much. But I know she working on a book and all this also. She got, big things are going on. So then let's get it started. In order to talk about it, I feel like we need to contextualize. I feel like we need to talk about the story so far and where we are in time. So the way that I have been thinking about that is very much we are in Saturn time right now. And it's been super strong Saturn since about 2018 when Saturn moved into Capricorn. Saturn moved into domicile in Capricorn in that moment. And then from that time, we've had Saturn in domicile for this whole period through Saturn in Aquarius. And we are coming to a point in March 2023 where Saturn is going to move out of domicile. Saturn is going to move into Pisces. And so we're going to change up the Saturn situation. But before that, up to this point, it's been super Saturn time. Not only has it been Saturn in domicile, but it's also been Saturn with Pluto. And we know that Pluto, one of the things that Pluto can do is magnify things wildly. We can think about the microscope. We can think about the telescope. We can think about things like the funhouse mirror when it comes to Pluto, right? There's something wild and distorting about the way that Pluto likes to operate. And so we've seen Saturn and Pluto together in Capricorn. When I first met Pallas, it was on the Astrology show, and we were talking about Saturn. And the way that Pallas at that time described Saturn in Capricorn was severe. And I loved it. And I think that the Saturn-Pluto in Capricorn has definitely lived up to that title, been super severe. We've had, and not only that, but there have been plenty of times throughout this moment in history, throughout this past 5 years or so, where we've had not only Saturn ruling Saturn, but Saturn ruling basically everything in the chart. Recently, we had a full moon in Capricorn where we had 10 planets, 10 out of 10 planets were ruled by Saturn, if you followed the chain of rulership. And so with this mighty Saturn moment going on here, and we can think There are all of our basic Saturn keywords that we can think about. We can think about structures and stabilities. We can think about authorities. We can think about restrictions and constrictions and all this sort of stuff. We can think about rule of law if we want to put Saturn into Aquarius. There's all of this Saturn stuff, which we will surely explore moving forward here. But all of this stuff has been at a peak. And now we are in a moment where this Saturn is really, it's the last little bit of it. So this is the final act of Saturn in domicile before Saturn sort of like runs out of steam a little bit. What am I missing here? What do y'all think about this situation?
Yeah, so one thing that I've been thinking about with Saturn, and I was working with it really honestly before I was even thinking about it, was like the Negredo phase, the Negredo process with alchemy, and how it's like a dying off process. It's the blackening. And so just thinking about that and like, what has your relationship with grief been? And, things are restructuring, yes, but like there's like a dying off process of what was and what will be moving forward. And so just inviting everybody to think about that, feel into that. That's been a really big thing for me. And then I also have been feeling into Saturn as containment versus a container, and like being able to like orient yourself in a way in which, yes, in a lot of ways we were being contained, but within that containment, were you creating a container to restructure your life and the way you're thinking about things and the way you're orienting yourself in life and how you can take that and move forward. And when you think about Saturn as a container or containment, it just gives you a better perspective on what the structure is that you're creating, rather than just the structures out in the world that are restricting or limiting us as well. So just being mindful of that spectrum and how important it is with any planet or any transit to, have a spectrum of consciousness about it rather than just this one thing. So that's what I've been thinking about a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. And one thing I've seen through a lot of the past few years, right, is this rise in like rhetoric around boundaries, and then also how that can be weaponized, and then how that's been sort of like renewed and reclaimed in different ways, like this understanding of boundaries as like a way, and structure as a way to like block ourselves off or block anything off, versus boundaries as a way to like facilitate connection, right? And so that's been sort of like this shift from Saturn in Capricorn to Saturn in Aquarius, right? Like it was so structural, and then it moved into, now we're new age of air, right? And so our ideas, right, like very like the boundaries around ideas, the porousness we navigate on the day to day on the internet, like now with people, which is different than it's not actually different than being with people 4 years ago, but like there are social ways in which things have adapted to this new age of air. And like, Saturn is explicitly so deeply part of that renegotiation of being in the world and being with each other. And that containment is such a big part of that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. Yeah, it's making me think about how I've been talking to people about noting the difference between a barrier and a boundary, and how they're very different things, and like you were saying, like one is blocking out, which is a barrier, and a lot of people think they're creating boundaries, but what they're doing is creating barriers. And then the boundaries are actually about, this is how we can be in connection, even if that means I only talk to you once every 3 months, or we only talk about specific things, instead of blocking you out because I have this different fixed idea about something.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Saturn is facilitator of connection rather than like arbiter of disconnection, I think, was sort of like Saturn in Capricorn into Saturn in Aquarius. And then of course, soon we get Saturn in Pisces, who's really great at boundaries. So it's good we got all this learning done.
Right, totally. We did learn a lot of things. We learned a lot of things during this time, and you mentioned something, Pallas, about the era of air that I should go over again. We've talked about it a lot of times, but like it's important. So a lot of times when we think about the basic nature of reality, like what constitutes what is considered real, then we'll want to look at Jupiter and Saturn conjunctions. And so those happen every 20 years, and they happen for a period of 200 years in signs of the same element or the same triplicity. And so for the past 200 years, we've been having Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions in Earth signs. And then in 2020, we started a new 200-year cycle of Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions in air signs. So that is to say that what constitutes reality, what gets to be real for the past 200 years was Earth. It was material. There was something about stacking coins, or we can think about coal mining and this sort of stuff, moving into a 200-year period where data is the new coal, where information is where the real value is, where information is where we begin to construct what even am reality. And so to see Saturn ruling the very first conjunction that we had at 0 degrees of Aquarius, at the very beginning of Aquarius, gives us some insight as to this new world that we're moving into and the ways that we might be able to think about containing ourselves or containing reality. Like when we think about what is reality, it's got to be something, there's got to be some kind of boundaries on it just so that we can get an idea of what's going on at all. So we can't just like blow the whole thing up, but we can switch it up. And we can change it to feel different, to be different. And so this is how we're now moving toward a new era, right?
Totally. Yeah. I just gave the talk at NORWAC that I gave was all about kind of like questioning our like earthy metaphors, right? The idea of like the transit cycle, the lunation cycle is like a seed cycle, and asking like, what is it if we look at cycles from like an air perspective? So we're thinking about pressure, we're thinking about rising and falling. And so, yeah, I'm very curious about that. And I think one of the like forecasting, of course, has like explicit ties to weather forecasting, and they used to be the same thing. Like I've been thinking a lot about astrometeorology, right? And like going back the almanacs, like it's the dudes, it's like the British dudes with all their tiny little instruments on their estates, like tracking things, right? And also simultaneously tracking like the movements of the planets. It's like that's what's happening again now. Like this is where we are. And using those, like, that's like the Austin Coppock's thing about like new ways of mapping, right? Like the new ways of mapping the terrain in the new age of era of air. I like that too. And it's like, yeah, that's where we are. And I feel like so much of the context of even what we're doing like here on this forecast is so related to trying to find those new ways and different ways.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about birds, and like I wonder, like, can birds see the air? You know, and can they see how do they engage with wind currents and stuff like that? Because clearly they know what's going on. You can see birds like flying through branches of trees and not hitting anything, and you can see them like, you know, like I have hawks in my lineage, so I spend a lot of time looking at hawks and just watching them do their thing, you know, and they just like, they look so comfortable in that space where I can't see anything, but they are known for being able to see things that we can't see, right? And so I wonder if they can see air currents, and if they do, then what that looks like to them. I've also thought about Eduardo Kohn speaks at length about the forest as metaphor, and how a feather as a piece of a wing is like a map of air. It is air sort of in physical form. Like the wing has a direct relationship to air. And so I wonder if the air looks a little bit like wings to someone who is ready to look at that sort of stuff. And so this is very much into like, how are we going to map this? I don't know. I was born and raised in the Earth era. I'm pretty blind to this shit. But here we are now. Welcome to the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So here we go, moving into the future. Let's talk about autumn 2022. Now, Cameron, I know you have big thoughts about the Ingress. So the sun is going to move into Libra in late September, and what do you see there? What's going on? Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I have the Ingress chart for the White House in Washington, D.C. That's where I chose to put it at, just because that's where I'm located. That's the country that I'm in. And so what the biggest thing that I saw to begin with, well, I looked at the ascendant, and
will you share that chart real quick?
Yeah. Let's see.
Audio listeners don't give a fuck. But for the people who are on the video, it'll be helpful for us to just be able to get a look at it.
So here's the chart that I'm looking at right here. And we see here, we have 17 degrees Taurus rising. So it's a fixed sign. And then we have Uranus on the ascendant. And so with everything that's going on in our reality right now, the first thing that I'm thinking about and feeling into is change. And it's like radical change. And also from an evolutionary astrology perspective, the planet Uranus has to do with subtle mental trauma sometimes. So it's just very apparent that there's something going on where we're having to be tuned into what kind of trauma has been going on. And specifically when it comes to Taurus, I'm thinking about like land and earth, and also like resources, and not just resources as a general theme, but the simple resources of food, shelter, and our bodies, and how comfortable or not comfortable we feel there. Also, right here, we see Pluto conjunct the midheaven. And so Pluto conjunct the midheaven, I'm just thinking about like power versus powerlessness, especially, again, from an evolutionary astrology perspective. It's just such a strong theme that's coming up. And so to have two outer planets angular is like where I was starting with the whole thing in and of itself.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Two outer planets being angular, right? So when we think about outer planets, then those are the ones that are not immediately visible, right? Those are the ones that are like a little outside of, when we think about like Mars or Venus or Mercury or something like that, there's something really like here and present about them. When Mercury's retrograde, then like your phone doesn't work properly or something like this. But then and it's super like you notice it immediately. Whereas Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, it's like we're looking at generational sort of stuff. We're looking at background influences and this kind of thing. It's not necessarily immediately perceptible, and as such, there's something like a little more tectonic about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is right before. So Saturn stations direct just a month later, right? So this is Saturn's only like less than a degree away from where it's going to station direct. And so this is extremely close to this last almost hit of the Saturn-Uranus square, right? Before they finally actually depart from one another.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that this final act of Saturn in domicile or Saturn in power, it's like the Saturn regime is almost over, right? And in that moment, it is not only is that act sort of kicked off by this ingress, which has Uranus on the ascendant, right? So this is, this Saturn-Uranus square, we're like, I don't know, 2 years into it at this point or something like this. So we've been doing Saturn-Uranus for a while, Saturn being authorities, restrictions, boundaries, this sort of stuff. Uranus being chaos, upset, unpredictability, sudden changes, also genuine authenticity, and this kind of stuff will show up with Uranus. So Uranus wants to check Saturn. Saturn is like, here are the rules, and Uranus is like, fuck that. And so to see Uranus on the ascendant sort of like gives us the idea that Uranus is going to be a big deal here, and Uranus is going to want to shake things up at this last bit of Saturn. Like, this is the very last bit of Saturn being in such great power and authority. And I noticed that here at the same time as this ingress, we've also got Mercury retrograde conjunct the sun. We've got this Cazimi going on here, right? Both of them are at 0 degrees of Libra. Mercury in Libra is pretty good. We like Mercury in Libra a lot of times. Mercury in Libra is able to do the communicative Mercury thing that we typically like. There's a sort of directness of communication. There's an ability to go back and forth. Libra is also very good at listening in a way that some of the other air signs are, they can struggle with that sometimes. And so we like that kind of dignity. And sometimes when I see the sun conjunct Mercury like this, I think about like a special message from the king, or like something special is coming through in this moment. And so this feels like a laser pointer moment of, especially since that's also the ingress. It feels like this is really and this also being opposite to Jupiter in Aries. This feels like a real shot heard round the world kind of moment here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And even thinking about like shot heard around the world, just going back to the outer planets and how it is like influencing the whole world in a sense. And then also we have the ruler of this chart being Venus in its fall and its opposite Neptune. So something around even just thinking, and then it's in the 5th place. And so thinking about like reproductive rights and stuff like that is like really loud in this chart. And then also we see the moon in the 5th place conjunct the asteroid Ceres. So it's having to do even more with like something having to do with like reproductive health and people with uteruses rights and stuff like that. It just feels like so alive to me. And it's something that I've been like bringing into my prayers and even like my candle magic. So yeah, it's just really loud there.
Yeah. And that moon just coming like right out of making those squares and oppositions to Uranus and Saturn too. I feel like this looks like repercussions of stuff that's already happened, right? It's like this looks a little bit like consequences. Yeah,
I definitely don't get the feeling that we're like treading new ground here, right? With that Mercury retrograde, and Mars is headed to retrograde at this point, and Saturn is retrograde at this point, and all this. We're in the Saturn Uranus square. We've been doing this for mad long now. We are definitely wrapping things up at this point. We're wrapping up this new chapter rather than like trying to trot on forward and do new stuff and break new ground and this kind of thing. We're definitely like, we're moving into a season, all of this whole season, this all autumnal season, this Q4 moment is gonna be strong review energy, like looking back at what's going on. How have we been treating this changeover from earth to air? How has it been going? Where have the mistakes been? There have been plenty of mistakes. We're all new with this shit, right? So even the strongest among us are going to have made a bunch of mistakes. How did those go? How can we do a better job? This kind of thing. This seems to be the theme of the season.
Yeah. And then even the moon, according to some definitions of it, it would be a void of course moon. And so to have that happen at the ingress of the autumn season, it feels in the autumn season, of course, in the northern hemisphere, specifically where I'm at, and that to me that feels good in a sense of the leaves are going to start falling off the trees, and it's like time to start kind of going down and in, and like to grieve and to let go. And so for me, that the medicine of the season is like really strong there with that.
Yeah, and that Venus in Virgo and the 3rd decan there too, I think is there's grief in that decan, right? It's like a powerful like underworld mercurial place. And so having the Mercury, not quite cazimi, but it basically is. It's within a degree. Having that happening at the same time, and then it looks kind of quiet, right? It looks like lingering consequences, maybe like resignation, and that the northern autumn always kind of has that feeling too, heading into Scorpio.
You think Uranus on the ascendant is going to be quiet?
No, but relatively to the last Uranus Saturn squares we've had.
Sure.
Saturn is super slow in this one, right? Like getting ready to station. Also Pluto in this. It's it's right on the midheaven, but it's also getting ready to station. It stations only it stations on October 8th, right? And this is, so both of these, Saturn and Pluto, these stations are, we talked about this beforehand. It's like, these are the last stations before the planet's ingress into Pisces and into Aquarius. So it's like in this last act that we're talking about, this is like, you know, the next time they station retrograde, it's going to be in Pisces and Aquarius, like in the spring. So we're heading into this. Yeah, those like last firm moments of what we're standing on before, that Uranus and Taurus is more undeniable, I think, without Saturn keeping it so much in check.
Yeah. And then once Saturn gets into Pisces, then it's going to make that sextile to Uranus. And so it's going to be more supportive. What were you going to say, Cameron?
No, I was just thinking like just on like a world mundane astrology level too, just looking at this Mars right here and how it's in the second house and just thinking about the financial situation going on in the United States and how that's going to be prevalent as well. Just like from a very concrete perspective there. And I don't know anything about finances, so that's it there.
Yeah, it looks like, I mean, this chart, I'm not a mundane astrologer, but this looks like a lot of finances and food.
Yeah, big time. Big time. Yeah, the basics, right? Basic necessities are more and more and more and more stressed. The basic necessities have been stressed as long as Uranus has been in Taurus. Again, going back to 2018, that's going to continue to be more and more stressed throughout this whole time. And I think it's important, Pallas, you mentioned that we've got Saturn moving into Pisces and Pluto moving into Aquarius in our sort of like broad strokes situation, right? Pluto is actually going to move into Aquarius and then it's going to go back out again and it's going to do a little toe dip situation. I think there's like 5 passes or something like this. And so it's going to be a lot for a period of time here. And then Pluto is finally firmly into Aquarius in the same year, 2025, as Uranus moves firmly into Gemini, in the same year that Neptune moves into Aries. And so while we are sort of finishing up this last act, and this is around 6 months long, then after that, we're going to go into a 2.5 year period of like, I don't know, transition. And then 2025 is when we sort of get into this next bit of things, like the next thing sort of really gets started. So thinking with our long strokes here, we've got from like 2018 is where we're coming off of, and then moving toward 2025. And so where are we in this moment now in 2022? So this also has me thinking a lot about so we're going to be moving toward this Mercury station as well, a little bit forward here. I think that's on the 2nd of October. And it's so that Mercury station is also going to be in Virgo, conjunct Venus, and also opposite to Neptune. Also, those folks are under a square from Mars and Gemini. And so this is like big, aggravated and confused energy. You know, whenever I think about Venus and Virgo, I think about an ability to really see the flaws, see the problems in things. You know, Venus and Virgo is really great for quality control, for copy editing and this kind of thing, like make sure that it's not whack before it goes out. But it also can maybe suffer from being a little too critical or this kind of thing also. Then we add that Neptune, the opposition to Neptune as well. And it gets like a little confusing, maybe a little delusional, maybe seeing flaws that aren't there or something like that. And then that being immediately conjunct that Mercury as it's trying to move forward, that really feels like it's, I don't know, loud and salient, you know, as we move forward in the season.
Yeah, all with the square to Mars too, which looks like acting on potentially those misconceptions.
Or misinformation, or just or the ways in which we have ideas that, you know, they're just opinions a lot of times. And, you know, it's like a lot of facts thrown out, but what is the real truth of what's going on? And I've been thinking about too with Venus in Virgo and just thinking about how can I, like, what's the difference between something being critical and me just working on the refinement of something, and knowing that in the times that we're in, where there is a lot of confusion, I can accept that I don't know and continue to be in relationship with life in a way that's just about refining things and purifying things to take them to their highest expression.
Yeah, and that making sure things are clear so those messages can be received feels like that.
Totally.
Right. Making sure that those messages... Oh, I'm sorry. Say what?
Go ahead, Zambon.
Well, this idea of like making sure that messages are going to be well received looks so wildly difficult at this time. Like, one of the things that I feel like we're going to have to do is like lean into confusion a little bit. Like, clarity is not forthcoming in a sky like this. You know, I don't feel like we're, you know, usually when I think about the arc of a Mercury retrograde, there's like a moment of like, I did the thing. All right, let's wrap it up. And then it's like, oh, that actually isn't, there were some mistakes. I didn't mean for it to come off like that, or something like this. Then we have to go back. Then we have to deal with all this. We got to try it another time. We got to, review, revise. All of our words show up. We're going to do it again, right? And then we sort of hit the station direct, and it's like, all right, we figured it out. We can go forward again. But at this time, in that moment of like, all right, we figured it out, what happens, what we get is this like conjunction of Venus and Virgo, opposition to Neptune and Pisces. And it's like, I still don't know, but we have to move forward anyway. We got to go. We got stuff we got to do, especially with this Mars here, bearing down, being like, we got to go. We got shit we got to do. So, finding a way to make space for the paradox, or make space for contrasting opposites. You know, this is a good time to get good at disagreeing. You know, this gets into what you were talking about, Cameron, like boundaries versus barriers. Do we need to create barriers with people with whom we disagree, or do we need to maybe find some better ways to make space or contain that conversation?
Yeah.
And that looks a little like very thematic just on the like Libra new moon that comes up right after this, right? Because that's when we have the Mercury retrograde, Venus conjunction, which is trine Pluto. Like, they both are trine Pluto within hours of being So we get the Venus trine to Pluto, and then we get the Venus Mercury conjunction, and then we get the Mercury trine Pluto, all while this Libra new moon is happening, right? And it's separating.
My fault.
Yeah, and that feels very like how we are critical, and how is similar to like how can boundaries actually facilitate connection? It's like how can criticism actually facilitate clarity?
Which is
It's tough. It's not easy for anyone.
Yeah.
I mean, my Virgo sun has so much. But yeah, totally.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you have full of criticism. You know, it's like, it's hearing it that's the hard part.
Oh yeah, my sound placements are all about it.
Yeah, get rowdy over here. And as we get rowdy, you know, like more and more, things are going to sort of just get rowdier this season. This is one of the things that I've run into with, with clients as well, is that they're like, I'm tired. Are we just gonna like, can I get a break at some point? And the answer is kind of no. You know, like, we had a break in the 90s. I hope that was fun for you. Like, it's not that moment. It's not that moment in history right now. And so we've got stuff that we got to do, you know, we've got stuff that's exciting and all this, you know, as we like this new moon here, or this full moon rather, we've got the full moon in Aries in early October, you know, like, this is closely conjunct Chiron, you know, so we've got big feelings going on here. We've also got this sextile, and the sextile relationship to Saturn in Aquarius as well as Mars in Gemini. So I'm very interested in what y'all think about this. When I've been thinking about Saturn in Aquarius trying to Mars in Gemini, because Mars is going to be in Gemini for mad long, and Mars is going to go retrograde. And so there's going to be this whole, usually when we think about Mars retrograde, we think about like too much Mars being over aggressive, like going in super hard. The gloves come off. It's time to fucking fight now. Something like this, right? And then to see that in a trine relationship with Saturn. So most of our sort of major historical moments, from looking at 2020 or whatever, have been Mars, Saturn in hard aspects. It's been Mars, Saturn in Capricorn. It's been Mars, Saturn in Aquarius, both of them, or a square. We had Mars retrograde in Aries in 2020, and then that was square to Saturn in Capricorn. Or, like there have been these major moments which have been hard aspects, but this time we get a soft aspect. This time it's Saturn in Aquarius trine to Mars in Gemini. To my mind, what I'm seeing here is I'm seeing Saturn the authority, right? I'm seeing Saturn the rule maker. And Saturn, ever cognizant of the long game, is aware that the regime of Saturn is about to be up. And so there's a kind of wildness, a kind of like, send the general out there and do the thing that I am commanding right now because I'm running out of time. You got to go take care of this. And if you're working on bad information, if you're confused by a square to Neptune or something like this, then that's fine. Just get it done. That's kind of what I'm seeing. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I'm feeling like Saturn is like, since it's still retrograde here, it's like reviewing how it's going to go about it. So I still feel like it's playing the long game, and it's going to express itself in a way in which it's feeling like or acting as if it's being supportive, but it actually can't be as supportive as it's trying to be in the beginning, with this trine here.
Sure, but this is a longer... This is a much longer situation than just this one particular moment of it, right? Because we've got Saturn in Aquarius trying to Mars in Gemini for the duration of that event.
Right. Which is what I mean. This iteration of it is going to try to support, but it's not going to really give the support it needs currently. But moving forward, it will be able to support more. Is what I've been feeling.
The place in the cycle this sits too, like we're still pretty early in this new Saturn Mars cycle that we're in, because it only started, like the conjunction happened in the beginning of April 2022, right? And the next conjunction doesn't happen until April 2024. And that is our first Mars Saturn conjunction in Pisces. So this is like, we're on the kind of last Mars Saturn cycle that started in a Saturn sign, right? And so there is this kind of like, that supports this idea of like this fading power, I think. But in this cycle itself, it is sort of, it's still waxing. Like we don't get that midway point. We don't get that opposition until July of 2023. And that's Mars in Virgo opposite Saturn in Pisces. So the midway point does favor that, like, Mars in Virgo is like, it's hot. It has like some triplicity stuff going on. It's versus Saturn and Pisces feels, Mars feels like a little bit more powerful there too.
Yeah, Mars is definitely super strong. And also in this full moon chart, then Mars is like ruling the moon as well as this Jupiter as well. Like Mars is strongly influential in this moment. And also if we think about this sort of like wider moment of flux and change, it's a very active moment of sort of moving in between the old way and the new way. And whenever I think about that kind of action, that kind of like need to get things into motion and try stuff, then definitely there's big, strong Mars energy. So that Mars is going to go, oh wait, you look like you have something.
I was going to say, because that full moon is the day after Pluto really stations direct too. So,
right.
Which in Pluto is like really
Aries,
widely
that's going to be square to Pluto also, right? Yeah. The Pluto thing, there's a lot of it, reckoning with the dead perhaps, or Like there's been a lot of talk about the Pluto return of the United States and this sort of thing, like really sort of reckoning not only with the dead. We can think about the legacy of death that the colonial empire has left. We can think about the ways that the Buffalo people were made dead simply in order to make them dead, not to eat them or anything like that, but so that they would be dead and not alive, right? So we've got a legacy of that. And that can only hold for so long, right? The mountain of skulls you can only sit on top of that mountain for so long before those skulls start to rumble, right? And so we're definitely in that moment where there's a lot to think about. And then, just thinking with the United States specifically, then that's gonna lead us into Pluto and Aquarius, and the United States has the moon in Aquarius, and then it's gonna be Uranus and Gemini and all this as well. So right, we're looking at definitely like big changes in the way, or I don't even know about changes, like a strong focus on the way that power operates. Does that feel right to you guys?
And the struggle for life. Yeah.
Ooh, that's good.
And I mean, Aries is that, right? And Chiron through Aries is that like attempt for life to overcome. And I think, in if we're talking like really long game, right? It's like the Saturn Neptune moving into Aries is the next Saturn Pluto in my head. Like when I'm sitting down with clients, I'm like, okay, what am I kind of helping you prepare for now? Right. Mm-hmm. It's like that Saturn Neptune into Aries, and it feels really related to that. And it's like, overcoming the death cult. It's very, Saturn Pluto to Saturn Neptune.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when I think about trying to overcome the death cult, then the main way that I do that is by remembering that the sort of most essential or atomized unit of reality is not the individual, but rather the relationship. Right? It is very much about, it's not just about who I am. I can only be who I am relative to others, relative to everyone else who is in my sphere. And that can be human people, that can be non-human people. It can be things that we might consider objects. It's like all of it together generates this reality. And so whenever I think about relationships, then one of the main planets that'll come up is Venus. Now, I know that Venus is about to do some real fun stuff. We're about to see a real major shift in the Venus cycle as well. Would you talk about that a little bit, Pallas?
Yeah. So October 22nd, we have a Venus Cazimi. So this is the one where she's direct. And we get one in the middle of Venus's retrograde as well, which is the retrograde Cazimi. And this one happens at 29 degrees Libra. I don't have the chart for that. I didn't think of pulling it up. We have... Wait, okay. Maybe I should pull up the chart. Should I pull up the chart?
I'm on it already. Just keep talking.
Okay, cool. So this is the first Venus Cazimi we have in Libra since 1879. The Venus cycle, 1879.
Wow.
Yeah. So so the Venus cycle, Nick Dagenbest, Ariel Gutman, these are astrologers. I have some stuff on it. People can do their research into how beautiful and amazing and astonishing the Venus cycle is. She has her Cazimi points in 5 different places in the sky in a perfect star shape. And over the course of centuries, these points, the star moves backwards through the zodiac, like degree by degree. And every 8 years, the same Cazimi, so the direct or the retrograde, the superior or the inferior, will happen at the exact same point in the zodiac minus a degree or 2. So it's like, say for your solar return, every 8 years, Venus is going to be very near your natal solar return, or your natal, near your natal chart, right? So this is like big macro stuff that also matters on this, like every single Venus cycle we go through. So this, we've been having this Venus Cazimi point in Scorpio. So every retrograde we've had that happens in Scorpio and has been slowly moving into Libra, this point, this middle of the cycle has been happening in Scorpio. And like Venus in Scorpio is such a different babe than Venus in Libra, right? And so this has been this extremely potent, like Venus and Scorpio energy for a century that this point has taken to move through the Scorpio sign. So now we're just starting on another century of Venus, these Cazimi points, one of the 5 Cazimi points, moving all the way through Libra. So we do have one more Venus retrograde in 2026, where the retrograde conjunction is in Scorpio. But after that, that's our last one. So after that, they're just all in Libra. And we don't have more Venus in Scorpios, Venus conjunction in Scorpios for another, like a couple hundred years, I think. Yeah. So we're dealing with these really long-term cycles that are, that also function, because it's Venus, right? They also function on an extremely intimate level and affect everything we do. And when we're talking about this like reclamation of relationship, that is like, I do see that as part of this Venus and Libra Cazimi medicine that's coming in, that we're seeing this like first real taste of on October.
And so when you think about a Venus Cazimi, like how do you delineate that? What do you think about that? Venus Cazimi in Libra,
where Mercury Cazimi is this, like, I tend to think of Mercury Cazimi and the one that happens when the retrograde ones that happen when Venus or Mercury are in between us and the sun, those ones are slightly different than the ones that happen when we are on the other side of the sun. Right? Like they're both conjunctions in the chart because their orbits are inside our orbit with the sun. So they both look like conjunctions in the chart, but they're a little bit different. And really you can only tell how they're different for you by tuning into them and like telling the difference, you know? But I do think of all of them as sort of like messages, right? Especially Mercury being messages. But Venus is like touch points, is like, can be connections or reconnections. If it's the retrograde one, it can also be disconnections, right? The retrograde ones tend to be more like internally turbulent, versus the superior ones tend to be, which is that what this one is. This would be sort of like the celestial Venus, versus the retrograde one is more like the terrestrial Venus per se.
What do you mean by celestial Venus? What does a celestial Venus Cazimi look like?
Like it's like the highest heaven versus like the deepest underworld is kind of how I think about it. Like different messages come from each. Different modes of connection do. The celestial one, the superior conjunction, is like bringing us the messages from the gods, maybe, versus the
this one is also giving us a square to Pluto and Capricorn, right? So are we thinking about like messages from the gods of the underworld?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I love it.
Maybe and it's just about relationship to the dead.
Well, yeah, ancestors. And I mean, it's such a long story. I mean, it's the longest story possibly, right? And so it's like what we're having now is like the way that Venus embodies Libra in this Cazimi point now is different than it would have been, 200 years ago, right? When, more of this relationship wasn't so fucked up for like not everybody in the world for sure, but like a significant number of people, I don't know, burning the most fossil fuels, right? Like doing the most violence and damage. And it's like, so yeah.
So this moment then feels like something of a reckoning with that, or like getting some kind of understanding or comprehension of that more sort of wider relational play. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I always called Saturn Pluto to people. When people were like, okay, no, really? Like, really, what is Saturn Pluto gonna be? And like, I would always say a reckoning when I wasn't fucking around.
Sure.
Right. And it's like, yeah, it's like looking around. It's like, that's definitely part of the story. And so this is like how, because Venus is more intimate and more in our bodies, more in our relationships. And it's like, how does that reckoning then really come down to earth and come down, like when we really let us, or when one really lets ourselves be honest about the impact of that and the meaning of that for our relationships and for how we relate, for how we even consider relationality. And this has to do with that, with what you were saying about like how to, like the element in which we understand reality, right? Like what analogies do we use? How do we, what is a wing, right? It's like this Venus coming in, she's like joining the conversation in a really big way now.
Yeah, that's interesting. That makes me, you mentioned this bit. There's a couple of things there. One is the discomfort of reckoning, which I think is well spoken to in that chart because we've got the moon in Virgo under a tight square to Mars in Gemini. And so whenever we see the moon square Mars, then like the moon is not as comfortable as you might like. And so the moon having to do with body and emotion and this kind of thing, and under a square from Mars, then that might be inflamed or aggravated or something like this, right? And so then to be inflamed or aggravated in one's body and emotion by the reckoning of listening to a special message from the dead is kind of what I'm hearing here, or like seeing in this imagery. Does that make sense to you, or is that what I'm?
Feels good.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not in the moment, but yeah, Cameron, go.
Yeah, totally. I was thinking because today, like on this day specifically, I elected to do, there's an event happening in Memphis, Tennessee called the Regal Affair. And it's just a collective of Black people coming together to like talk about not only ancestors, but health in the body and how we have been aggravated and agitated by just existing in the system that we're in right now. And it's like a new way of relating for people in Memphis. So I'm just like hearing all this and being like, oh wow, this is really spot on. And I'm really excited about that event, and definitely had the feeling that I was going to bring up ancestors a lot. And so it's just a good manifestation of it already. And so just wanted to reflect that it's happening.
I mean, that's also, the day after Saturn stations direct, like Saturn is stationing at this time too, like on its way into Pisces now. Yeah.
So if we want to talk about Saturn and a lineage of bondage or something like that, then there's something really important there. Also, when you were talking about that, Cameron, then the book The Body Keeps the Score came into my head, and this idea of like carrying generational trauma in our bodies, and that being explicitly aggravating, like on an emotional and or physical material tip, and that being well represented by moon square Mars here as well, I feel like is a big deal. Then now also, like not for nothing, moon at the end of Virgo is headed toward an opposition to Jupiter. And so, Jupiter wants to help. Jupiter wants to make things better. And opposition isn't necessarily fun all the time. It might be a little tough love kind of situation. It might be a little bit of like bitter medicine or something like this, but it is medicine at all. So, we're not mad at that.
Yeah. And even thinking about the event that we're going to have and it being Memphis, Tennessee, that's what's going to happen on that day. You know, like whenever we get together and there's going to be like a panel talk and stuff like that, it's like, it's going to be some clashing, but it's going to be in the aims of healing and expanding into something new. So yeah, feeling all that deeply.
Yeah. So then, so Pallas, you mentioned also that there's an element of honesty here that's important. And so whenever I think about honesty in a relationship, especially in a like Libra style relationship, then I definitely think about like listening honestly, like actually trying to hear what that person is saying rather than like hearing what I feel like hearing and stuff like this. But further from that, one of my favorite times to talk about honesty is when Scorpio stuff happens. You know, Scorpio is honest as shit. Can get Scorpio into trouble that way and all sorts of stuff, right? And so we have big Scorpio vibes that we're moving toward after this moment, right? We've got this Venus Cazimi at the very last degree of Libra, and then immediately we're into Scorpio, and the Venus and the Sun are going to hang out together for quite a while there in the first few degrees of Scorpio. We're going to have a new moon in Scorpio, in fact, and that is going to be an eclipse in this same moment. So we got to talk about these eclipses. Like, what are we doing here? Let's pull this chart up. So, all right, that's not the one. Oh, that is the one. Yeah. All right. So new moon in Scorpio, closely conjunct Venus, square Saturn, opposite Uranus. It's a lot. It's a lot going on.
It was right on it was right on the ascendant in DC too. I hadn't seen that.
Yeah, it's
it's the flip because there's like September ingress had that Taurus Uranus on the ascendant.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a real good point. Yeah, so we still got this like the Scorpio Taurus polarity is thick here, whether or not we have planets like the sun and inner planets in fixed signs. No matter what, we're not getting away from Scorpio Taurus polarity. And then this is kind of, you know, if it's a mountain, we've been ascending to a certain point, we've been coming up more and more tension on this Scorpio Taurus situation. When I think about Scorpio and Taurus a lot, I definitely think about embodiment in a strong way. You know, like Taurus is always thought of as being like really excited about corporeal pleasure, you know, things that feel soft on your skin, or music that is particularly delicious, or savory foods, or what. I just like all the sensory sort of delights and sort of stuff, right? Scorpio, on the other side, is very sensory, but often associated more with what I might call funk, right? Things that there's a PU kind of smell going on here, right? Like the smell of bodies, which can be sexy for some folks, or at some times in some moments, which can also be bathroomy, which can also be, BO, and, you know, like I always think about like compost and this kind of stuff, right? It's super rich. It's very nutrient dense, but it's there can be something maybe a little off-putting. And especially since this is also a solar eclipse on the south node, then we're definitely gonna, like, the diarrheal thing can show up here, or like, you know, down and out. How are y'all feeling about these Scorpio eclipses at this time? Or we can talk about the Taurus ones as well in 2 weeks.
I want to hear what Cameron has to say, but it's definitely purgy.
Yeah, that's the first word I was going to say. You know, it's really here. I'm thinking a lot about and even thinking about like the attraction and repulsion of, like you were saying, like the scent of my lover, and like how they taste so good at certain points in times, and then like they go for a run or their shit's coming up, and it's like, now you taste like kind of salty and weird. And I'm like, ugh, that's kind of nasty. You know, it's like being with people and being with myself in this like purge time. And just knowing that's coming is going to be like really, really, really important for me. I mean, during any eclipse season, I have a tendency to be a recluse because that's when shit hits the fan and I'm like working with a lot of people and that's when the stuff's coming up. So I'm always just like feeling into that orientation. And even for me as a medical astrologer, seeing this in conjunction to Jupiter and then just knowing like other things are going to be coming up, like maybe like stagnant things that were like having to do with like anger since in Aries. And so just being prepared for that to come up is like how I'm kind of orienting towards this one. But definitely Purge City here.
Yeah, and seeing Mercury like slowly approaching the degree of that like Venus Sun conjunction too, right? And that like that honesty, that anger, that purginess.
Yeah, speaking about honesty or speaking with honesty is probably something that's going to show up here big time, right? Because we've got the ruler of the new moon in Scorpio is Mars in Gemini, and Mars is basically stationary at this point, but also getting this super strong trine from Mercury in Libra. And in fact, this is a grand trine. We've got a grand trine with Mars in Gemini, Mercury in Libra, and Saturn in Aquarius, right? So this is like big malefic energy here, you know, this is malefics working together to do malefic shit, you know, and Mercury isn't a malefic. And in fact, Mercury is in a benefic sign here. But if anybody was going to be a switch on us, you know.
Yeah, and 12th house in this chart too, right?
Right. Mercury and is like, definitely suggestible, right?
Some nice stuff happening, but definitely in the background.
Right.
We've got two dark houses here.
Yeah, and it's like communicating things from the malefics. So it's like messages aren't inherently good or bad, but if we have two malefics in an easy flow of what I'm about to say in the 12th place, it's like what I'm about to say is something that's coming from like my unconscious projections is kind of like the feel of it. And then even seeing this Mars and in conjunction with Pluto is connecting the things that seem personal, but are like really transpersonal or bigger or like coming from more like a traumatic place. And then the Mercury also being in conjunction with the Neptune. And so all these outer planet things we're blind to how the bigger picture of maybe like my ancestral trauma, my generational trauma, what happened to me when I was younger, and what's happening in my unconscious processes are coming up. And so that even again, from a medical astrology perspective, is in conjunctions are super important because your blind spots are the places where, you're going to need to be making adjustments to purge, digest, which you have internalized from before. So I wasn't going to really bring that up, but that's like really big there, really big.
Yeah, the blindness is such a big deal here, right? Because we've got these inconjuncts that you've been talking about. We've got Mercury in the 12th in a dark house. We've got Mars in the 8th in the dark house. We've got this whole lunation as a fucking eclipse. So there's like darkness in Scorpio, which is a dark ass sign. So there's like,
and Venus is invisible.
Right. All that, right. So there's a strong element. So even though it's Scorpio and it wants to be super honest, honesty is not the same as truth. Right? You know, and because I feel like there's big confusion energy here. I can't see what's going on. I don't know what's happening. I'm feeling big feelings about it, and I can tell you how I'm feeling about it, but that's not necessarily going to be nice for you. That's not going to feel good necessarily for who knows who that might feel good for, right? But then but there's a need to purge, a need to like, you know, vom about it. Like it's got to come out, whether or not it's like appropriate or whatever, right?
Yeah. And even Scorpio being the ascendant for this chart specifically, I'm also, when I work with Scorpio and a lot of people, I work with like the pelvic floor. And, you know, so like what's going on in people's pelvic floor oftentimes is telling the truth of how they're actually carrying themselves in life. And a lot of people aren't attuned to that. So it's like whatever's coming out, it's like all the tensions and all the constrictions that I'm holding in my pelvic floor And then that being an eclipse coming there, it's like, it'll be very easy to see what is dark in someone's psyche at this time. You know, it'll come to the light, you know, lights on, lights off kind of thing. It's like, and I know, it's going to be really strong. So.
Yeah. And this is such a big story. And I mean, we just saw this with Uranus on the North Node with Mars there too. Right. And it's like so many people talking about like how that gets embodied and expressed. Right. And so these stories, like the eclipse stories with the Scorpio Taurus, and it's like, I'm like, I see with clients so much of what you're saying and myself, right? It's like, how does that Scorpio stuff then get embodied? Right. And it's like, how does that trauma then express itself? And like so many layers. And I think that like intergenerational layer is so huge and part of the bigger Capricorn Pluto story, and like how that relates to this like massive like resource connection, right? To like, and this is Uranus and Taurus. This is the earth stuff too, right?
Because it wants to move toward being embodied, right?
Yeah. And like expressed somehow. And it's sort of this question. And on that previous chart too, I was seeing that like Neptune in conjunct to Mercury also, right? There's like a Neptune layer to that also. And it's like, how much of this are we able to be conscious of eclipse periods? Like, so the 2 weeks, right, between then and here, it is that like the purging quality has this way of like making things conscious.
Yeah, no doubt.
Which is potentially truth, right?
Yeah. Or at least the truth will come out, even if you didn't experience like what was going on from before. You know, that's one thing that it's important to be mindful of. Even just like, people even backing off of being in fear and just like, oh, my shit's going to come up, and just like letting it actually come up so that you can be in relationship with the truth rather than in relationship with your holding patterns.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, you know, and I feel like, and again, a relationship with your truth sounds like something that is such a big deal under a lunar eclipse in Taurus, which is so closely conjunct Uranus, right? So whenever I think about Uranus, then there's definitely something that wants to show up about genuine authenticity. You know, like Uranus is the one who like refuses to be repressed this way any longer. Like I simply cannot deal with this shit any longer. I gotta break free. I gotta come out of here. I'm not doing this anymore, right? And Uranus really loves the authentic individual, the one who's like is going to march to the beat of her own drum just because she's gonna do it that way. Meanwhile, at the same time, we also have this Mercury Cazimi going on here in Scorpio, right? So we've got super honest Scorpio opposite to deeply embodied, upsetting, unexpected, surprising, genuine, and authentic Uranus and Taurus. And square Saturn. So how are we going to deal with like...
And Mars is retrograde now.
Yeah.
On the 30th station, right? October 30th?
I think so.
Yeah. Related to that, can I pull a chart up before you pull this one up?
Yeah, do it.
Oh, you gotta cancel yours. All right, here we go. So eclipse periods, one of my favorite things is looking at when we get the quarter moon in between eclipses. That's like one of my favorite underrated charts, right? Is like looking at the moon that happens, the quarter moon that happens in between the eclipses. So this is our November 1st Aquarius moon in between the Scorpio eclipse and the Taurus eclipse. And it's like that moon has to square Mercury and then square the sun and then Venus and then the nodes and then go through Uranus and then go through Saturn all the time that it goes through Aquarius. So that's a very catalytic quarter moon to get there.
Yeah, I almost like the squares a little more as catalysts. because they're you know, there's like a tension that, like, sometimes oppositions will stalemate or they'll sort of like destroy each other, you know what I mean? Whereas a square wants to launch in a direction, especially a T square like this.
Yeah. And this is right after Jupiter's regresses into Pisces too, right? Which happens on October 28th. So this is our first this is like I think this is the closest we get to the Mars Jupiter square, because it's like Mars has just stationed retrograde and Jupiter has just moved back into Pisces.
Yeah, so this is a wacky week or two, you know, between that new moon in Scorpio and then the moon in Aquarius has got to do all these squares and everything, and Mars is going to station retrograde, and Jupiter is going to regress into Pisces. So this is going to take us from, we've had Jupiter in Aries for a little while, and I feel like Jupiter in Aries has been like edging and ruining the orgasm. You know what I mean? Like you really want Jupiter in Aries to be great, and then it's like, you know what? Never mind. We're going to go back. You know, maybe it's just me. Maybe that's
no, that's good. I'm laughing honestly because I've been in this like orgasmic mastery course, and just like you using that right there was just like so perfect. Yeah.
I love it.
I have Mercury in Scorpio. I'm gonna say the shit like that. So
no, and I mean, this is the Mercury in Scorpio in that chart too, right? It's like, okay, so we get this first eclipse with Mercury in Libra in the 12th, and it's like, what are we holding in, right? And then it's like that quarter moon is like Mercury's moved into past the eclipse point, moved into Scorpio to join Venus. And it's like, okay, like what comes out? Like what gets released now?
Yeah. Yeah, all that stuff. Well, on the second eclipse right there too, just like thinking about Mercury being opposite Uranus and all these outer planets and all this other stuff that we're talking about, just inviting everybody to during this time, just like really take care of your nervous system. You know, it's like really big stuff coming through. So just focus on like rooting down. If you use oils, like just like covering yourself in oils to coat yourself and protect yourself from all the energy that's coming up. Really important thing to do, you know, just a simple, even if you have to go to the grocery store and just get the most simple tea, just get it, maybe use a few bags of it, and just really caring for yourself during these times is such an important thing because there's so many things coming through. And again, with outer planets, it's like bigger than us. It's generational. It's the whole planet experiencing it. And like, we're not necessarily, when I say we're not period, meant to be like handling the whole world, which like some people are trying to like take on the problems of the whole world. And it's like, not only are we not made to do that, we would have to build ourselves to do that. So even if you are a type person to take on a lot of stuff, whether it's your own family's generational stuff, or if it's the problems of your generation, it's like, well, you really got to put in work to be able to tap into such things. And I would even dare say you would probably have to been started in 2018 to even be able to have the capacity to do that now.
Totally.
So just be mindful of that, everybody, please. It's really important.
Nourish the moon. So that means nourish your body, eat food, drink water, make sure you're resting enough, make sure you're hugging people, all this kind of like, what does the moon like to do? You know, the moon loves to be in Taurus. The moon does not like to be rocked by eclipses and Uranus and Saturn and all the rest of it, right? Like this is a rough time on the moon. This sort of makes me think of the other day I was sitting in a room full of sort of magically operant people who were discussing power dynamics in the world. And so there was like all this stuff about like, it's so crazy. And then somebody consulted the oracle and the oracle was like, you mind your knitting. It was like, all right, that's my job. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like winter's almost here. What do we need to be doing in the Northern Hemisphere? What do we need to be doing?
Totally.
To prepare. Yeah. I mean, and that's such a Taurus Scorpio question, right? It's like we need to, who's counting the grain?
Sure. One thing also that shows up a lot on Scorpio and Taurus, I feel like, is drugs and drug addiction. And maybe not drugs necessarily, but addiction. This feeling of like a compulsive need to medicate or to touch or something like this, right? Like, so that's going to come from a lack, which might be well described by shit conjunct the South Node, right? And so eclipses especially are going to be like strongly feeling stuff. There's like big stuff that wants to sort of like come up and rumble and all this sort of stuff. So if that's a thing for you, and I feel like it is for a lot of folks, because we can even think about like social media addiction and all that, right? And like, so, and I feel like people are, a lot of my clients, I deal with a lot of clients who have addiction issues. I think they can smell it on me. Like it's a whole thing. So that if that's a thing for you, then that's a thing to be aware of. And again, that sort of gets us back to nourish the moon. Make sure that your needs are being taken care of. If your addiction is coming out of a need to, or a lack, a need is not getting met, then make sure, do what you can to make sure that you are getting what you need. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's something too, like always Scorpio season, right? Especially like Venus and Scorpio season, there is just more like connection to the dead happening. Like people who maybe haven't had it happen their entire lives, or like they just tend to be more open to it, or it comes into their sphere in some way. And part of like, I think that's great. Like, I think more people should be talking to the dead, like, but with like appropriate boundaries, with connections, with support, right? While like nourishing the body, while not losing connection to like what's going on here right now. And it like being able to tell us like something about life and something about like what it means to be alive. And then of course, this piece about like the nervous system and like what amount of spiritual experience can we tolerate? Like, how have we increased our like appetite? Like, has our appetite increased alongside our like tolerance, alongside our like metabolism of our ability to deal with like connections to the dead, with increased spirit contact? I think about like these things with these eclipses as well, with the Saturn square, especially. It's like, what structures, what relationships do we have in place in our living life that can support our like relationships with the dead and our relationships to spirits?
I love these digestive metaphors as well. For Taurus and Scorpio especially, this sense of like taking something which was a sensory delight, taking some food, and then taking that external object and turning it into me. Like there's a lot of stuff that has to take place in order for that to happen, and some of it is deathly, right? You got to kill somebody in order for that to happen, and then you've got to masticate, and so you've got to like you got to shred stuff, and then like it's got to become unrecognizable, and like there's a metamorphosis kind of component to that whole process. And I think there's something really really important with the idea of digestion. What even am digestion?
I'm finding myself thinking about that Venus at 22 Virgo in the ingress chart too. That was the ingress chart, right? Yeah, and just like thinking about, that Venus in Virgo is like kind of a guide to like what's going on. In some way. Venus in Virgo has a lot of ideas about digestion.
Yeah, and then I didn't hear anybody say anything about the Scorpio part of it, where it's like making sure you're getting rid of the shit. It's like what you brought in must come out. And so just being mindful around that too, and how much are you holding on to versus how much are you ingesting?
Yeah,
it's huge.
And finding the right balance of that. I'm sorry, say again.
Yeah, because especially when it comes to like the nodes and eclipses, like it'll like create more toxicity, and the toxicity will express itself during that time, and it'll look like depletion at the south node or like a scattering out of anxiety at the north node. So,
one of the things that'll also happen a lot with eclipses is it looks like a seesaw. you know, because there'll be like big stuff happening in Scorpio, and then wait 2 weeks and big stuff will happen in Taurus, and then wait 6 months and big stuff will happen in Taurus, and wait 2 weeks and big stuff will happen in Scorpio. So there's this like seesaw kind of component to it. So the way that that often looks is like it's doing the most in one direction or another. And so sort of finding the balance in between, like, how much do I hold versus how much do I excrete? There's a, you know, finding that balance. The way that you balance on 2 feet, or the way that you balance a scale or something like this, is necessarily by swaying in one direction and then going back to the other one, right? And so it's sort of finding this dynamic balance in between those two poles. That's super important here.
Yeah, I'm thinking that scale stuff is good, especially that, like, you know, like the Venus point moving into Libra too. And with this Taurus Scorpio stuff, I'm thinking about, like hoarding mutual aid, right? It's like how much scarcity is happening right now, like not only around the globe, but also like in our communities, and just thinking about like, the tendency to consume and hold on to. And like, how does that, it's like, that absolutely works like on a bodily system. And it also works structurally. I'm thinking about that, looking at that chart too.
Yeah. And something I always like to say too with the eclipses, everybody just being mindful of whenever there's a transit to the 2-degree mark and the 16-degree mark for the rest of the time until the next eclipses come, especially when the squares happen. Because sometimes like those echoes will just like come through in a variety of ways when planets go over that. And the moon is a really good one to like tune into for that. You know, those emotions come back around because the moon keeps moving. So, yeah. So to clarify quickly, you just said that when planets transit 2 or 16 degrees of fixed signs from the time that we have that new moon solar eclipse in Scorpio until the next time that we have eclipses in Taurus season in like April of 2023. From that whole time period, then whenever a planet transits 2 or 16 degrees of fixed signs, then we can expect these same themes to resurge. Is that what I heard you say? 1,000%. Yeah. It's like a reverberation. So echo reverberation happens there. And so sometimes there's like days and I've even, exactly. Yeah. I've even like seen it on Twitter happen. People are like, what's going on today? Like, you know, usually people have like all these ideas around like what's happening based off the trends. People are like, whoa, today's really fucking weird. And they're like, what's happening? And I'm like, I'm just like watching those eclipse points happen. And I'm in my 3rd year of doing it. And I'm like, holy shit. Like it's there really strongly. And also, you know, from an evolutionary astrology perspective, just like what my emotional identity is trying to like digest and process, you know, thinking about the moon being the stomach and the north and the south node being the head and the tail. And it just like can give me like I can find more comfortability even in my insecurity while watching this process happen.
Yeah, Uranus is actually at 16 degrees until December 2nd.
Yeah. Hence the nervous system thing.
Yeah. Sag season. Yeah.
And then we move into Sag season, right? And so more. You know, like we're still like it's not time to chill yet. There's more yet to do.
Yeah. Oh wait, there's that nice moment. We want to bring in that nice moment.
Oh yeah. Talk about the nice moment before.
Okay, I need to credit my partner, Rain Mason, the astromage. I was like, is there anything nice going on in the next 3 months? And of course, they're like constantly scouring things for election.
Sure.
And like November 14th, there's this moment where the moon. Does someone have their? I didn't pull it up. Okay.
I'm coming.
Sweet. Yeah. Morning, November 14th, there's this moment where the moon is in late Cancer and it's moving in between Venus and Scorpio and Jupiter and Pisces.
Did you have like an exact time for that? Or?
I think there's like a couple hours.
Yeah, okay, I'm seeing it. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so it's sort of like it's very
early in the morning.
But it looks, and it's like, yeah, it's like going to be moon day. It's just like it's like a sweet way to wake up, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I do love the moon in Cancer. And I love that the moon in Cancer no longer has to oppose Saturn in Capricorn.
That's been really nice.
Yeah, because the moon has been, well, like when it was moon in Cancer opposite Saturn in Capricorn and moon in Taurus conjunct Uranus, then it was just like all the most uncomfortable moon that had ever happened, and there was just no comfort for the moon. Whereas now, like the moon in Cancer doesn't have to deal with that. In fact, the moon in Cancer, part of the beauty of this moment of the moon in Cancer is that it's also averse to both malefics. Mm-hmm. So it's just not the malefics are out here maleficizing or doing whatever it is that these motherfuckers is doing, and the moon can just chill and be easy in Cancer and make a nice trine to both benefics at the same time. What?
Yeah, and even the whole like night beforehand too, it's like the moon's in the trine to the sun, and then Mercury before it even hits Venus. It's like, okay, yeah, we got like an opposition to Pluto in there somewhere, but like, we've been doing that since 2008.
Right. What's a little opposition to Pluto among friends?
But yeah, so this is beautiful. It
looks like a nice night for sure.
Yeah,
nice Sunday
nice
evening,
night and morning.
Like a nice little, so if you're looking to your, so we can expect that all of the wild and raucous things have been happening with the eclipses and all this kind of stuff. And then, so if you do need a moment to nourish, you need to nourish your moon, you need a moment to relax or to be easy, to hug somebody you love or something like this. This is a really good moment to sort of lean into that, and even honestly, that opposition to Pluto might sort of like make it feel a little deeper. Like it makes it, to my mind, it's like we haven't had something like comfort in a while at this point, and so by the time we get there, it like feels like the most comforting comfort that ever comforted.
Tending like old wounds.
Yeah,
that's what this looks like.
Yeah, I love that.
Down to your bones.
Thanks, Rain.
Yeah, good looking, Rain.
Yeah, always gratitude.
So then let's talk about Sagittarius.
Oh, one of the things right in that ingress. Oh, I guess it'll probably be in the ingress chart. So that Mercury retrograde Venus conjunction we had in Virgo, right? It's like this Venus Mercury conjunction in Sag is like the sort of next iteration of that. And so there is this like echo to that from before.
Right. And that's a square. So we're on axis. So like,
yeah, exactly.
If we think about Virgo, if we want to put Virgo on the ascendant or whatever, then like whatever's angular to that, then this is going to be angular to that. And not only that, but also, so this is going to be where before it was Mercury in domicile / exaltation. Now it's Mercury in exile or detriment, right? This is, and so we've got a square to Jupiter, an applying square to Jupiter going on here. So that's cute. But we also notice that both of these planets are invisible in this moment.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I'm super excited for when they get visible again.
Word.
I always like feel more tired when Venus is invisible. Which is a significant amount of time over the course of a year.
Right, totally. Yeah, I mean, it's probably like half of total time or something like that, right?
Not quite half, but yeah.
Word. But it's like, this definitely looks like a tiresome period of time, So once we get into Sagittarius season, then like everything has to oppose Mars, and not only is everything going to oppose Mars, but it's also going to square stuff in Pisces, Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces. And, I really want to like Jupiter in Pisces. In honesty, I got to be real. even this last iteration of Jupiter in Pisces, I didn't have that much fun. I didn't like it as much. I forecasted really nice things, and there were some nice elections. I like got some good talismans out of it and stuff, but I didn't really enjoy the transits that much. And this doesn't look particularly fun to me either. It looks confusing. It looks like it maybe wants to overpromise some things, like it looks like, because this Mars is so driving in this moment, right? We've got this Mars retrograde in Gemini that's like opposite all the stuff, including the ruler of Gemini, which is Mercury. And so that's going to be like big, spicy, fiery, like, dude, we got to do stuff. It feels like a, like a deadline is approaching or something like this. And then again, we're still just confused about what is the right thing to do or what's appropriate in this moment. And Jupiter's like, don't worry, I've got a solution. And like, this motherfucker doesn't know what he's talking about. Conjunct Neptune.
You're like directly adding my IC book project right now.
We can't wait.
But this is also Jupiter stationing direct on the day of the new moon.
Okay, sure. So how do you feel about that?
It's slow. It feels slow and it feels heavy and it feels like, I mean, there's some retrospection here for me, I think, which is interesting because it's like everything in Sag, it is so forward looking. It's like everything you're talking about. But there is this like, there's actually this Mars retrograde, right? It's like, and I'm still talking about my book project. There's like, things we have to do that we didn't do before we can move forward, right? And that Jupiter just in Pisces feels really like, heavy.
Yeah, I was always thinking about it as removing the obstacles of the stuff that we feel like we were confused about. So not even like being confused, but actually just focusing on removing the obstacles that removing the obstacles of, I think I know what I'm talking about, or I think I knew where I was going. And it's like, actually, I'm just removing those things. And by removing those things, that is the gift that actually Jupiter's bringing.
I love that.
Okay.
Putting that in finishing my book pile. Thank you for that one.
This makes me think about who was it? I forget her first name. Osorojos is her last name. She speaks about resonant attention. And this idea of like allowing technology, just like if you can get into the space of like complete allowance, then that's when the healing takes place, or that's when like things sort of like come through and get better and all that sort of stuff, right? And so Jupiter in Pisces with Neptune, this is I love this open roads analogy here of like removing obstacles, get stuff out of the way, maybe get me out of my damn way, right? Like that sense of like allowing it to take place might be something, might be some medicine here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, even sometimes especially in the modern day, like the way sometimes people would describe the Pisces energy of it being like kind of just like floating around a bit. It's like actually getting with that can be really, really helpful. It doesn't mean that, what do they say? Like everybody who's wandering isn't lost. So like if you can actually get with that and allow yourself to wander, then you can actually be present where you're at, right? If I'm out in the woods, if I think that I should know where I'm going and I just got there, then I'm confused. And if not, then I'm wandering around and I'm figuring out life itself. And so a lot of times, especially with transits that look like they're heavy or difficult, it's about the orientation. It's about where you're coming from rather than focusing on the external result about it.
Yeah, and Mars and Gemini is definitely like losing the map.
Yeah, big time. And it's like,
which is good. Like that can be a blessing for sure. You end up places you didn't even know you wanted to go.
You can do that. I feel like this Mars wants to pressurize it. I feel like this Mars wants to like show you how difficult it is to actually allow it to let the reins go. You know, because I feel like this Mars in Gemini, especially opposite to the Sun and Venus and stuff, it like really wants to do this thing. You know, like it. I feel like this Mars in Gemini is like white knuckling it the whole damn way. You know, and But you're right that there is this medicine of like, can I be present? Can I be here in this space? Like, if I don't get it done, then can I still live in the world?
Yeah, and that Venus, Mercury, and Sag too. I mean, it's like that's very fuck it in like a positive, joyful kind of way. Energy, right? Yep. Like I love that.
Yeah, Venus and Mercury and Sagittarius. It feels like caroling or like getting like drunk and excited in the streets and loud and rowdy and this kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like singing loudly and I don't give a fuck.
Well, this is actually, so we mentioned avoid, of course, moon before. It's like I noticed and blessed honeycomb. I was like going through my planner too while preparing this. And they mark when there's a real like Hellenistic, serious definition void, of course, moon, which is very rare. And so there actually is one starting on the 25th. So it's like after the moon makes that square to Jupiter, it actually doesn't make another aspect to a traditional planet until it enters Aquarius. So it's like we have a whole over 48 hours that the moon doesn't make any traditional aspect.
Wow.
Wow. Talk about meandering.
Yeah, exactly.
Real like wandering. I may or may not be lost, but...
Yeah,
wandering is what I'm doing either way.
I'm going to check back in with that and schedule a nothingness space.
Right, like a whole weekend. Like, thank God it's on a weekend.
For sure. Wait, yeah, this is a really good time for a long weekend.
Is this American Thanksgiving too?
Oh, probably so, right?
I don't even know. I'm from Canada.
Yeah, it's the fourth Thursday.
Yeah. Wild. So
this will probably track. Yeah.
Oof. Sounds like a lot of, for me at least, this is like when I would try to do something transcendental. It's like, taking me what I think I need to do into like nothingness or nowhere, voiding, like even in evolutionary astrology, it's like the perspective of the moon, oftentimes like the ego or the emotional identity and how I'm projecting outward into the world. And to void myself of that could be really helpful.
In the mind, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Moon mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, letting that tether go a bit and having that's a beautiful like alignment with the Jupiter and Pisces still with that Neptune, right? Like put on some diving gear before heading in there.
Sure. So then, pushing onward and awkward as always, we've, next we've got this, here we go. Yeah. Now we've got this full moon in Gemini. And so this full moon in Gemini is 2 weeks after the new moon in Sagittarius, right? And it is it is directly conjunct Mars retrograde.
I keep trying to forget about this one. That Neptune has, I don't know why I'm the station person. I'm kind of obsessed with planetary stations, but this is like, so Neptune is just stationed, or it's stationary this week. So technically station's on the 3rd. But so Neptune is stationary gives it like and 5 square.
Days on either side.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Sometimes I give like a couple weeks. Sure.
Yeah. Especially one of this magnitude where it's square to everything also. And like this is a lot. This is a lot of aggravation and energy. It's very exciting.
And we've just had that the retrograde Mars with Saturn trine too. So it's the second layer of what we were talking about with the general and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this really feels like that to me. This was the chart that made me think about that. I was like looking at this and I was like, oh, this is because it looks a little manic, It looks like Mars looks like it's in a rush, You know what I mean? And like, I know it's like retrograde and whatever. Like Mars retrograde to me doesn't feel the way that a Mercury retrograde feels, where it's like, oh, it's probably not going to happen. It's going to be delayed, or it's going to be like slow or whatever. Mars retrograde actually feels a little faster than regular Mars, than direct Mars to me. It's like extra Marsy, you know? Yeah. And then, so we've got that. And then, so Mars retrograde by its nature is going to be opposite the sun, and therefore opposite to most of the personal planets. Also, we can see that in this moment, we've got Mercury and Capricorn here as well. So Mercury is definitely, and Capricorn is definitely like big general kind of energy. You know what I mean? Like sort of commanding the troops and this kind of thing. And so this to me definitely, and so that mania is what had me thinking about like, oh, Saturn is running out of time and needs to make some conquest quickly. You know what I mean? Like Saturn has been in conflict with Uranus for a long time. And so if we can think about Saturn as authority and Uranus as rebelling against that authority, then Saturn has been able to hold a lid on that. It's been like Saturn has maybe taken some damage and like it's been difficult or whatever, but has more or less been able to hold that down. But we're coming to the end of that. We're coming to the end of Saturn being able to hold it down and just like be the machine as it was. And so because the end is near on that machine or the establishment or whatever, then there's this manic, like, we've got to get some stuff happening out here. We've got power plays to get in order.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken too, where this Mars is at and where this full moon is at is really, really close to the Mars or the Uranus of the United States.
Interesting.
So that's also I forget exactly, but I know it's prevalent. That's what I would say for sure.
Mm-hmm. And Nick Dagan Best will talk all day about Mars and Gemini and the Uranus and Gemini and the importance of Uranus and Gemini on the history of the United States.
Yeah, didn't he write a book about it? I haven't.
He did. Yeah, he wrote a whole book.
I saw that recently come up again. His work is so much of like my own cycles work definitely owes to Nick's
yeah, he's
work.
the cycles OG for sure.
The living ephemeris.
Yeah, but so like for folks who maybe haven't read that book, Uranus and Gemini was World War II, and prior to that, Uranus and Gemini was the Civil War, and prior to that, Uranus and Gemini was the Revolutionary War. So it's been these major turning point moments in American history, and so then now, if we're also thinking with the return of Pluto and the return of the dead and reckoning with that and reckoning with the economic system and the legacy of imperialism and whatever, right? And seeing that then having this major turning point moment, which is not on the calendar until Uranus and Gemini shows up for real, right? But what Cameron, you're saying here is that this is like a little bit of spark for that already, right? This is like if Uranus and Gemini is the snowball having gotten to boulder proportions, this is like the first little bit of the snowball. This is like just throwing it down the hill, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, an evil wink. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to put this into the Mars opposition. I mean, some people treat the Mars opposition as like the beginning of the cycle, but I definitely treat it as the middle of the cycle. Because it's like when we are in between the sun and Mars, like directly, right? And so I love that. And so it's kind of like the Earth is actually, kind of caught between the sun and Mars. And so the conjunction that happened in October of 2021. So we're kind of like 1 year, just like 1 year and a bit into the cycle when we have this opposition. And then the next conjunction, is in November of 2023, and it's in Scorpio. So like the last one, that one in October of 2021 was in Libra. So it's like this cycle that we're moving in, this midway point with this Mars retrograde, it's another one. It's like moving from a Libra, like a Libra Mars into a like reborn in Scorpio Mars in November of next year. That feels potent for all of what you're talking about too, and having this as the midway point between that.
That also feels resonant alongside. So in that moment, that's going to be right after the end of Scorpio eclipses as well. So a bunch of stuff has gotten cleared out of that area. And then a Mars conjunction to the sun in that moment is going to be like, all right, we are cleared out. It is time to fucking move.
Well, it's like, I think of Mars Kazemi moments as like renewed missions, right? And so it's like the one we're in right now is like it's a Libra mission, right? Next one be Scorpio. So this is like the peak of that.
The peak of the Libra mission.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something I was going to leave out, but I'm going to say it now is also there's work done by Mark Jones, and he works with the planetary nodes because every single planet has a place where it has its nodes. And so this full moon is on the north node of Uranus too. So just like so just also inviting people to bring in or be mindful around like any type of information that might bring up subtle trauma from the collective, and just like knowing that ahead of time is really important, you know. So just throwing it out there. There's so much more I could say about that, but I would leave it at that for now. But just know it's a very sensitive point, very, very sensitive.
I mean, it is this in conjunct and semi-sextile too, so it's even Yep.
Yeah. So that's just like it's very strong here. Very strong.
No, that's a really good point. Oh, I love planetary nodes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Thanks for including that.
Totally. So that sort of brings us to the end of the quarter. It's a wild and crazy time. There's a lot going on here. Moral of the story is nourish the moon.
Yeah.
Hug the people who are important to you. Don't forget to hug them, because you'll probably fight them some too during this time. Don't forget to hug them.
Yeah.
Honestly, like, something I've been like even incorporating in relationships is before you even say something that's going to lead to fighting, like holding each other while doing it can be like a really helpful thing. So just like outside of astrology, just like,
sure.
Co-regulation.
Robin Rose Bennett gives a prescription for rose tea that you like do a foot bath of rose tea. So when you're like going to have a hard conversation, then both people have their feet in rose tea. So there's like a desire to connect and be together in the heart space first. Like that's where the feet are. So we're going to operate from that place. So if we're going to have a hard conversation, if we're going to be like, here's a thing that makes me feel crazy and I want to fucking fight about it or whatever it is, then you operate, instead of being in a place where you're like ready to throw a shoe, then you sort of start in this place where it's like, okay, first priority is what I want is for us to feel better. Right. So if we need to like go through some weird emotions, we need to be like super honest about stuff. Right. Like we can think about the Scorpio South Node situation. Got to be super honest. It's going to be maybe purgative in some kind of way. Maybe like a word vomit situation is going to happen here or something like this. If this needs to take place, then let's be sure to remember that the goal here is not to drive the other person away. The goal is not to be right. The goal is to feel better in this relationship. And so that I feel like is sort of what you're speaking to here, right?
That November 14th, beautiful moon, Venus, Jupiter, Pluto moment feels really like, that conversation, even just initiating that kind of conversation.
Indeed. Well, thank you both for being here, for rocking with me for this whole time. This has been a long time coming. We've been talking about this for like a year now, and we have now sat through over 2 hours of being here. And I feel like we've done something very exciting, and I very look forward to having y'all back. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, this one's beautiful.
Yeah, appreciate you.
Thank you both.
So, Cameron, what you got coming up next? How can the people find you? CA Dream6 on Instagram. What else you got? What's happening?
Yeah, CA Dream6 on Instagram. My website is www.cadreamplanet.com. Right now, I'm running a 12-month webinar series with Kepler College over holistic embodied astrology, so you can get that there. I also have a course out with Astrology Hub that you can find through my website called The Health Secrets of the Zodiac. I write monthly articles for Yoga Journal. By the time this comes out, I'll definitely have like a Mars and Gemini article out. And then soon I'm going to have like article out on the eclipses. So you can find that at Yoga Journal. And I have like other writings about yoga and then herbs and stuff like that too as well. What else you got going on, Cameron? Oh, my talk at NORWAC is on my website now. It was a great talk. So invitation for people to tune into that. I'll have my talks up from ESAR, which I introduced fascia as Saturn, which is a new concept that I'm bringing into astrology. Concept theory, working theory.
The word on the street is that shit slaps.
Yeah, it was really good. I was really excited about it, and I'm looking forward to developing it more. And then I have a talk over this called the medicinal malefics. So we're working with the malefics in a way that can be like really, really helpful and help us with our orientation towards it. So those are all the things at the current moment.
And you can find all of that at cadreamplanet.com.
Yeah. And just go to my Instagram, and I'm always posting stuff there. So yeah, I would say that's it for now. But if something else comes up, I'll just say it again.
For sure. And always check the links in the show notes there. All of this will be linked up. And so Pallas, what you got going on? What's next?
I'm technically on hiatus. I came out of my recluse lifestyle to do this with you two because I love you both so much. And so you can go to my website, which is nineofwands.com, and you can get on the mailing list there because I'm still sending out newsletters every once in a while, mostly like promoting my friends' shit, but also including some writing. And like, yeah, and every once in a while I have a tiny little bit of session availability, and whenever I'm able to do that, it'll go through the mailing list first. Yeah, that's it. The book's wrapping
Definitely
up.
get on
that's
that
all I'm doing.
list.
I'm so excited. Yeah.
Word. Yeah. We are all just like eagerly awaiting the moment when you can come back and kill us with all these talks that you've been given and the book and all the rest of it. We just can't wait. So the mailing list is the place where you got to be in order to know about that.
Yeah. And my NORWAC talk actually is available on the NORWAC website. So it was finding the thread, ways to weave planetary cycles in the consultation. Everybody laughs a lot. Like the audio gives out at one point because everyone's laughing so much. It was pretty, yeah. But only for a second. You don't miss any. It's a good recording. But yeah, so that's available there too. You can get that.
There was so much love that the mic couldn't handle it.
Oh wait, I also have another thing that you can still get even though I'm on hiatus. Nova Network, NOVAA. I gave a talk on Venus for them on part of the Venus cycle. So yeah, there's a bit there.
Yeah, Pallas's work on the Venus cycle is dope. Love it. Make sure and check all those things out. If you want to support the ZamboniFunk project, you can go to ZamboniFunk.com. You can find all the shit there. I've got all my talks are available for free, so you can find those shits there on the website. You can send me a tip via Venmo, Cash App, PayPal. I don't have a sponsorship or nothing, so I just do all this out of pocket, and it is kind of expensive. So if you want to send me a tip, that would be super helpful. If you want to go to Spotify and listen to Can't Help Myself, then please do that. I'm super proud of that tune. A super helpful way to do that is to not only listen to that song, but put it onto a playlist as well. So that way it'll just come on sometimes when you're not paying attention. And then also Spotify will notice that users have put it onto the playlist. This is going to be really good for making sure that other people who maybe haven't spent 2 hours listening to me blather about astrology, though those folks will still be able to get 4 minutes of that funk. And so be sure to do that. You can find me on patreon.com. Also, I do /ZamboniFunk. I do an electional report there every month where we talk, or where I give advice about you can launch at this moment in order to get the most out of your launch. You can wait at this moment in order to not mire yourself in obstacles and bullshit. You can find all of these things at ZamboniFunk.com. Thank you so much. Thank y'all for being here. Thank you to Pallas and Cameron. Thank you to the fam. I appreciate all y'all. Look forward to seeing y'all next time. Bye.
Peace.